Chapter 2. The morning weather was chilly, as light snow had fallen during the night. Eunice and Ronald were about to drive out north to Maryland to visit with their daughter, just back from the hospital with her new baby, their first grandchild. Eunice called Ingrid to tell her they were on their way. Moments later, Ronald started up the car and pulled out of the driveway. Eunice sat in the front passenger seat. The rear seat was jammed with baby food, Pampers, baby clothes, and balloons. Ronald drove slowly through the estate of single-family homes where they had lived for 27 years and raised Ingrid and her brother Hans. He soon joined the interstate highway from where the distance to Ingrid and Osak's home would be a 25-minute drive. Eunice's perpetual smile was etched on her face. Ronald's countenance was the opposite. He was a wiry man, seemingly always in a hurry and serious. He was Southern-born and had moved to the Northwest with his mother and stepfather as a young man. His mother's abusive relationship with Ronald's alcoholic biological father had ended in a bitter divorce, and his mother had been granted custody of Ronald. She met a native Washingtonian serviceman a year later and married him. Several years later, they relocated to the Seattle area where Ronald spent his adolescent years, graduated from high school and college, and started a professional career in the hotel industry as a manager. This entailed him being on the road a lot, as he rose in rank and had to supervise various locations of the hotel chain. He typically drove carefully from his days as a supervising hotel manager. Ronald drove at the speed limit on Interstate 95. Several vehicles whizzed past him at top speed. Eunice did not know what to make of Ronald's serious countenance behind the steering wheel. He had an inscrutable mien, but he was also a loving man. She knew how to crack through that facade of seriousness to engage him in interesting and funny dialogue. But she was also aware that Ingrid's relationship and eventual marriage to Osak was something he had disapproved of and had allowed to bother him for a long time. During the 4 years that had elapsed since the marriage, the hurt had slowly healed. He had cut off communications with Ingrid, and only Eunice's reconciliatory persistence ended the feud. But Eunice still suspected that some hurt, diminished as it seemed, was still left inside his soul. Maybe the birth of his first grandchild would flush out the rest of the hurt, she thought, as they motored up the interstate and the distance to Ingrid's house decreased. "How do you feel about going to see your granddaughter for the first time?" she asked him, piercing through his serious facade. "I feel great. I'm looking forward to it." "That's good," said Eunice. The unusual light traffic was a factor in how quick that their journey was. Ronald pulled up in front of the house exactly 20 minutes from the time that they had left their home in Northern Virginia. Osak had spied their arrival from a bedroom window upstairs. "They are here," he said to Ingrid. "Oh, great. Let them in." "Of course." Osak hurried downstairs to open the door to let his in-laws in. They exchanged pleasantries as he ushered them in and led them into the living room. Several minutes later, Ingrid emerged from the bedroom with Felicia. She walked down the stairs gingerly, cradling the baby carefully in her arms. Soon she reached the living room, and pleasant excitement from her parents erupted. Ingrid passed the baby to Eunice, who beamed. Ronald gazed at the baby in amazement. Felicia was neatly wrapped up in blankets, and only her pink and cheery face showed. Ronald touched her cheeks and tickled her face. Felicia smiled in response. Osak served drinks and snacks. He had kept his in-laws pleasant company for about 10 minutes when his phone rang. It was Bilki calling. Osak excused himself to take the call. He suspected what the topic of the call was going to be about, and to be certain that the conversation would not be overheard by his wife and in-laws, he went outside to take the call. "Hello, Mama," he greeted. "Hello, son, how are you?" "I am fine, thank you." "Son, I called to ask when you are bringing the child for the circumcision, so we can prepare ahead of time." Osak was quiet, for he did not have an immediate response to the question. Bilki continued, "Your father consulted the oracle, as custom required of him to do, to find out who among our ancestors had reincarnated in your daughter, and the finding was very surprising. He found out that the matriarch of the community, a woman named Uwa, who with her husband, named Icon, settled our community several hundred years ago and raised 8 sons. Our 8 villages are named after the day, is the one who reincarnated in your daughter. This is the first time she has come back since her death, all those hundreds of years ago. Your daughter is therefore special. She belongs not only to you, but to the entire community. Your father will talk to you about the reincarnation ritual ceremonies and big feast he will lead the community to engage in to welcome back this great matriarchal ancestor to the community." Osak, still lost for words, listened to his mother, never cutting in to say anything. She continued, "Although you have named her Felicia, we are naming her Owa, the name she bore when she first lived on this earth several hundred years ago. The circumcision must be done during the period of the ritual ceremony and feast," she concluded. "When is this ritual ceremony?" Osak asked. "No later than 1 year from the date of her birth," Bilki answered. "Mama, you are making my life very difficult with this demand." "How so, Osak?" "I wouldn't be able to convince my white wife to go along with the circumcision of Felicia. I told you that the last time." "Son, is it your wife that will make this decision for you? Are you the man in the marriage or not?" "Mama, it is more complicated than you think." "Son, I warned you when you told us you wanted to marry outside your community and marry the white woman. Remember, I told you about the high probability of problems with her about your cultural heritage." "You did, Mama, but there are things that are old-fashioned which must go, and female circumcision is one of them, Mama." "Is it because the white people said so?" Bilki shot back. "Why did they bring us Christmas and force us to believe in Christmas?" Is Christmas original to our culture? Mama, religion is different. Besides, Christmas celebrates the birth of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Osak's parents were Muslim. Bilki therefore challenged his assertion. No, our religion recognizes him as a prophet, not the Savior of the world. In any case, the whites brought the religion here, and you converted to it. Do you know how much pain you caused us by this conversion? The kingmakers were going to strip you from succeeding your father, but it prevailed on them to stand down about it. Now you are trying to cause another trouble with this circumcision argument. Mama, I keep saying to you that this matter is more complicated than you think. It won't be easy for me to comply. Osak, I insist on my demands being met. Your daughter is not an ordinary human. She is the great matriarchal ancestor Uwa. The risk of not complying with what tradition and culture demands might make her sick and cause her to return to the realm of the ancestors. What does that mean? Osak asked. It means what it means. Figure it out yourself, said Bilki. Osak had been outside for about 15 minutes now on the phone with Bilki. Ingrid spied twice on him from a gap in the window blinds during that period. She observed him animated at times, and she had never seen him that way before. She figured something had to be wrong, perhaps at his office or something else. Whatever it was, she would ask him about it when she got a chance, perhaps after her parents had left. Osak came back into the house. He had a smile on his face which belied the anguish he felt from the just concluded conversation with Bilki. Ronald and Eunice just continued chatting with him from where they had left off. But Ingrid was a tad reticent to carry on as if all was fine. In her 4 years of living with her husband, she had come to know what made him tick and what set him off, although occasions like that were extremely rare. Osak was a devoted husband who adored her. She had been tickled to no end one time when he told her that she reminded him of the blonde and blue-eyed baby dolls his parents bought for his sister as birthday gifts when she was very young. He told her he loved the beauty of those baby dolls probably more than his sister did, never knowing that he would someday marry a grown baby doll in human form. He called her my grown baby doll every now and then to make her laugh. They lived very happily. He maintained a highly successful accounting practice, lived clean, never smoked or drank, except red wine in social settings, and exercised regularly in a gym he had set up in the basement of their house. There was only one thing about Osak she had discovered could pierce his otherwise cool and endearing persona and character, and it pertained to his involvement in a registered association of his kinsfolk in America. He and fellow compatriots from their hometown in Africa, resident in America, had established the association with a mission of providing developmental assistance to the town and her people. They considered themselves privileged to live and work in the USA. They were thus driven to help their less privileged kinsfolk back home by providing funds to build schools, community health centers, and to implement scholarship programs for the brilliant who couldn't afford to pay their way through college. To fund these projects and programs, they imposed a mandatory levy on members of the association. The body was run by an elected executive, and it met once a month. Osak was a regular at these meetings, for he cared deeply about the less privileged back home. But the meetings tended to be highly contentious, and Osak always came back from them exhausted and at times withdrawn as a consequence of the battles. He would be lively, loving, and his funny self before going off to these meetings, but would often return from them in a deep funk that lasted for hours sometimes. Ingrid, concerned for her husband and what these meetings were doing to his mental health, tried to persuade him to stop attending them. Yes, he could go on sending in his monthly levy, but for the sake of his health, she wanted him to stop going to these meetings. But Osak kept on attending. And so one day, just before he was to leave for another monthly meeting, Ingrid hid his car keys and pretended she did not know what had happened to them. Osak looked everywhere in the house but couldn't find them either. Ingrid, maintaining her ruse, even helped to search for them. Osak was forced to skip the meeting. He was upset that he couldn't attend his cherished association meeting, but he was not as forlorn as he usually was after returning from the meetings. Ingrid figured this was a better alternative deal for him, but she also didn't think she could sustain this extreme measure of stopping him from attending in the future. He could coincidentally lose his keys on the same date and time of his scheduled hometown association meeting one time, but losing them repeatedly would definitely give her up as a key snatcher, in quotes. The keys reappeared the next morning after Ingrid found them, in quotes. Osak did not suspect anything was amiss, that she had hidden the keys to stop him from attending his hometown association meeting, but Ingrid could not keep secret of what she had done, and so she confessed to him about it. It was done out of concern for his mental health, he had told him. She tried to persuade him anew to stop going to the meetings. They were in the second year of their marriage when this incident had occurred. Osak's reaction to her admonition and sly confiscation of his car keys was strongly negative. He told her off, warned her never to meddle in anything that involved his African community again, and told her he was prepared to walk away from the marriage over the matter. Although he later apologized for his overreaction, particularly his threat to leave her, the episode was burned in her memory. Ingrid learned, hotly dramatic as it had played out, that Osak was cool in everything, just don't mess with his commitment to his quarrelsome Kinsfolk's Community Association. The animated conversation Ingrid had observed him engage in outside was out of the ordinary, unless it was related to the association. But she doubted such because association business was always conducted at their once-monthly meetings. She knew this routine very well. Later that night, after her parents had left to return home, Ingrid asked him about the phone conversation he had seen him so passionately engaged in. What was that all about? Are you okay? She asked. Oh, that was nothing. It was a client whose audit I had done and is due to be picked up tomorrow at the office. We were having a little talk about my fees. Osak had no option but to lie to Ingrid about the explosive conversation with his mother. He hadn't even begun to deeply process the demand from his mother to arrive at a firm stand on it. His initial reaction had been to recoil at the demand, but he had also given a brief thought to the alleged supernatural forces involved and the implications. His mother had warned about Uwa returning to the ancestral realm. if she was not circumcised and made to go through a reincarnation rite. Uwa being the name she called Felicia. Osak interpreted this warning to mean Felicia's possible death, which would be an unspeakable tragedy should that occur. Did you guys resolve the matter? Ingrid asked. Not quite, but I've asked him to see me in the office tomorrow. 2 months elapsed without any calls from Africa for Osak. He thought elatedly that his mother had given up on her command. Then his cell phone rang one night as he ate dinner with Ingrid. This time it was his father on the phone. Excusing himself, he stepped outside to talk, suspecting the subject of the conversation would be poisonous to Ingrid's ears. He had the option to talk in his native language, but he had never done that before with Ingrid within earshot. He regarded that as disrespectful to her. Even his kinsfolk in the USA, who called him from time to time when Ingrid was with him and started up a conversation in their native language, did not receive a reciprocal discourse in that language from Osak. He always spoke back in English. Outside now, several yards from the porch and standing on the sidewalk, Osak spoke into the phone. Hello, Father. Hello, son. I hope you, your wife, and Uwa are fine. Yes, we are. I hope you and Mother and everybody else in the family are fine as well. We are, son. We are also about to start planning for the ritual ceremony and feast to welcome Uwa back to the community she departed from hundreds of years ago. She may have been born in America, but she is spiritually with us here in the community. I hope you know that. Mama mentioned something along those lines the last time we spoke, said Osak in response. King Ibu had additional information for his son. The oracle revealed a lot of things about Uwa's past life we did not even know. Her birth in America even has a linkage to her past. We were shocked to learn about all of that, said King Ibu. The discussion of these issues are new. 2 months after the stressful talk with his mother distressed Osak all over again. He had thought that the 2 months hiatus in phone calls from her meant his parents had decided to move on from the matter. But this call definitely demonstrated that was not the case. The claims about Felicia and linkages to some dead ancestor sounded outlandish to his newly cultivated American mindset. He would have believed it before the start of his American experience 7 years earlier. Back home in the community that shaped his early life, he had been attuned to the complex, esoteric, and supernatural-laced traditional beliefs of his people. But being away from that community now for 7 years and rooted now in American culture, having received its education and married into it, his connection with the ancient beliefs of his people was now tenuous. But a strand or two of that connection still in his psyche was curious about his father's claim of a linkage of Felicia's birth with a dead ancestor and America. He had to ask his father to elaborate on that. What is this linkage you talk about concerning Felicia, the past, and America? He asked. Well, her name is Uwa, son. You named her Felicia, but she is Uwa, and will always be known as Uwa, his father admonished. The oracle told us that white people came to our community during the lifetime of Uwa, and that she and Iken, her husband, befriended the leader of those white people who brought them new things from their country. The white people left with one of the couple's 8 male children. They promised to educate him in the white man's ways and bring him back. The boy did come back after several years, and he had nothing but good things to say about the white man's land. Uwa then vowed to live her next life in a white man's country. The riveting story made Osak reminisce about his secondary school history class in his country. One such account was about Portuguese explorers who first landed in West Africa in the 15th century and had initially engaged in non-human trade with African tribes. A few powerful kings among these tribes had sent their sons to Portugal to be educated. If the story about Uwa was true, it probably occurred during this period, Osak reasoned, though he was still skeptical about the claim his father was making. "We are waiting on you to bring her back for the circumcision and the ceremonies," said King Ibu. Osak's conversation with his father had lasted 10 minutes. He came back into the house and rejoined Ingrid in the dining room. He wore a serious mien, and this was not the case before he stepped outside to take the call. Ingrid suspected it had to do with another of his hometown association issues, which often sapped him. She asked him about it, even though she knew he didn't like her meddling in such issues. "I hope it's not your association's issues again that caused this tightness on your face." "No, it's not," said Osak. "What is it then? You were perfectly okay until that phone call." "I'm okay. It's that same client from 2 months ago. He has been a pain. He has complained about my sections of the audit I did for him, and he still owes me a balance of my fees." Arising from their dinner about an hour later, Ingrid, cradling Felicia in her arms, took her into the bathroom to change her diapers. Osak absent-mindedly picked up the dishes, walked over to the kitchen, and put them in the dishwasher. He next went into his office to prepare for the next morning at the office, where he had a full schedule, for it was tax filing season again. This was a period that kept him extremely busy and working late nights. Ingrid had another week of maternity leave before returning to work at the law office where she worked as a legal secretary. Osak worked for a couple of hours, then came to bed. Ingrid was still awake as she rocked Felicia to try to make her fall asleep. When they kissed and said goodnight to each other, lying on their king-sized bed, Osak nursed a slight headache from his earlier conversation with his father. Ingrid slept soundly through the night, but Osak turned and tossed for most of the night. End of chapter 2.